I'm going to invite to the scenario here. Let's start, as you see in the screen, with Hector de Rivoire. He's the Director of Public Policy, Office of Responsible AI in Microsoft. And if we can give a round of applause, please. Thank you, Hector. Welcome. Also, let me invite Omar Khalkar, who is Chief of Staff to Nicolas Miale, AI Safety Connect. Welcome, please join. Also, Estefanello, who's the founder of RAISE Foundation. Welcome, Eric. And also, last but not least, Professor Asha Kanwar, who is the chair of the UNESCO IT Governing Board and chair professor of the Beijing Norval University. Welcome. Thank you so much. This lightning panel is entitled Harnessing the Power of AI, Safe and Ethical Integration, for one reason. As I said before, we need to be optimistic. But we know, and as Hala perfectly stated, artificial intelligence is a technology like others we had. We had cloud computing before, blockchain is coming, quantum computing is one technology. But it depends on how we shape it, use it, deploy it, how it will come. So the objective of this session will be to discuss, among this wonderful panel, how to leverage the power of technology in a safe and ethical way. Studies from McKinsey state that artificial intelligence could contribute to the GDP up to 40% by 2030. This means contributing between 13 to 15 trillion to the global economy. I can say that at the moment, if we continue as we are, this economy increase would be uneven as it is concentrated. So how can we remain optimistic in this scenario? I have an answer. I developed the program, what is called Digital Girls Peru, when I was working in the government. And a little girl from Cajamarca, who is a city in the center of Peru, told me after finishing the training, she said, I want to develop an app to help my mom grow their crops. And that's the optimism that we need to have, because there are rural and urban populations that really want to use this technology. But we need to help them with capacity building, with infrastructure, to taking care of their land, what we were discussing today. So the first intervention of our panelists here are 5 minutes opening remarks, so that we can get from you, from your different perspectives. We have academia, technical, civil society, industry here. We were supposed to have government, and Ms. Kavita Bhatia, COO of India AI, sent her regards because he couldn't travel at last minute. But we really have a very diverse panel here. So I would like to start with Professor Asha here to my left, to tell us, Professor, how do you think we can harness the power of AI in a safe and ethical integration?
You want me to go there?
As you prefer.
Thank you, Paula. That's very helpful. We've had a wonderful presentation about biases, and that's part of it, and I'm representing the education sector perspective. So this is something we haven't talked about much so far. We know that AI is causing major disruptions and leading us in new directions in not just education, but in all aspects of our lives. And we are confronted with very major questions. Are we shaping AI, or is AI shaping us? And yesterday we had a kind of fairly fearful discussion about this, about existential threats and nuclear threats and so on, which AI could actually accelerate. So are we exacerbating existing inequalities in our society, or are we using AI to create a fairer future for all? And let me quote Manuel Castells here, and I quote, "Technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral." This is something to remember. It's a force. So technology cannot be considered neutral because it actively shapes and is shaped by social relations networks, and power flows, as we well know. So how do we ensure that the futures we build with AI are not only technologically advanced, but are also socially just and globally equitable? Around the world, educators, learners, policymakers, and communities are already co-designing AI systems grounded in local needs, cultural contexts, and ethical considerations. So it's not as if all is lost already, it isn't. But let me share three main developments. The first is that the education sector embraces generative AI. A recent Microsoft report found that 86% of all institutions surveyed around the world had already adopted generative AI, and education being the highest among the different sectors. And most students who were interviewed said that, we would be very unhappy if Gen AI was taken away from us. They enjoyed using it. Yet, 45% of students and teachers globally said that they had received no training, and that's what they really wanted. So if Globe Ethics is looking for opportunities, here's a real felt need. So the other thing which came out in this report was that pure online teaching was not having the results that a blend had of online plus traditional teaching methods. So the human was very much in the loop, and therefore research suggests that a hybrid augmented intelligence model combining human and AI strengths enhances student outcomes. So this is a very important finding. The second development I want to highlight is that the impact of generative AI on critical thinking, is it positive or negative? There are about 700 million weekly users of Gen AI, and the numbers continue to grow. A recent MIT study, and we saw that in Time, shows that the participants who relied on ChatGPT had difficulty recalling what they had written. They were asked to write essays, and claimed less ownership of what they had written. This preliminary study with a small sample size suggests that over-reliance on ChatGPT appeared to undermine critical thinking, memory retention, and cognitive efforts. So more research is needed on how to harness the benefits of generative AI without losing the best aspects of learning. The role of teachers will change, but remain central. I mean, it's changing already. And this shift requires rethinking what kind of professional development teachers need. Harvard researchers have already demonstrated that it's possible to leverage generative AI to provide one teacher per student at scale and globally. So researchers have proposed that the future is a blend of human and artificial intelligence in what they said is hybrid augmented intelligence, which I've just referred to. So students play more active roles in their learning, and professors serve as guardrails of knowledge, ensuring that we have the best of the human and the machine. And the teachers must be supported in their roles as facilitators, mentors, and guardians of the safety and well-being of their learners. So I think if we are looking for some priority sector, teacher training is number one. So the third aspect is, of course, the growing AI divide. So while AI offers extraordinary opportunities for transforming education, it also poses several challenges. There's already a widening AI divide. According to ITU, there are 2.6 billion people still who do not have access to the internet. And I'm just coming from another conference in Nairobi where they were talking about, we still don't have electricity, we don't have connectivity. And those are things, we were talking about even 20 years ago in Africa. So what can we do to accelerate progress in developing infrastructure, connectivity, et cetera? So in addition, what we just saw in the launch of the Swiss chapter of Women in AI, a UNESCO study shows that 44% of all AI systems demonstrate gender bias. And when algorithms are designed from the perspectives of young men from the global north, they can unintentionally exclude learners from different racial or linguistic backgrounds. And ADG UNESCO thinks that it's, about most of the algorithms are designed by under 40 young men in the US. In addition, the other linguistic issue is that most of this is, the large language models are trained on English data, English speaking, and the kind of main language data. Africa has about 2,000 languages that are unrepresented in the digital space. They've started doing something about, digitizing 18 languages in Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, but it's still just the tip of the iceberg. So unless that data is included, which exists in different linguistic and cultural communities, we wouldn't have an overall universal picture of diversity that we are trying to promote here. The landmark recommendation, which was referred to also earlier, on the ethics of artificial intelligence adopted by the General Conference of UNESCO in 2021, outlines 7 primary points about how member states can use a gender lens to develop and use AI. And this ranges from supporting women's entrepreneurship to putting in place strategies to ensure the elimination of harmful social norms from data that is used to train AI. So mainstreaming gender and diversity considerations into all stages of the AI life cycle is recommended as one of the concrete ways forward. So those were my 3 main points. And just to sum up, UNESCO organized the Digital Learning Week last month. And I was at the round table, the ministerial round table, where there were 19 ministers, mostly from the global south. Of course, there were countries like the UK and UAE also represented. And they sort of were given a kind of set of questions to respond to relating to the status in their own countries. So let me just sum up what the discussion actually was about in 5 points, which ADG Stefania Giannini summed up and highlighted. And these, she said, were the 5 urgent priorities that needed to be addressed for education. One is that the widening AI divide was a new frontier, and there was a need for a stronger alignment between education and the private sector to build the sustainable digital infrastructure. The second was that safety was a non-negotiable. And this is not something where there could be kind of discussion or compromises. The third is that the human relationships between teachers and students were irreplaceable, which we all agree with here. And localization and cultural relevance matter. And finally, there was a need for global solidarity and shared standards, which we are talking about, because you can't have, limited standards or regulations it has to be global. Because if you develop regulations in the European Union, China may not say, well, what do we have to do with these? Or the US may say, what do we have to do with these? So global standards are needed. But this is, I think, a wonderful opportunity for us in the education sector to take care of all the things which we were not able to in the past, issues of access, quality, equity, costs. All these we can mitigate by using AI in a positive and responsible manner. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Very much appreciated, Professor Asha. And I'm here to take to your point. I would like to challenge a bit the perspective in terms of we need these principles and coherent, right? Because I think at the moment, and with OECD principles, G20, G7, Hiroshima process, the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI, I think the world at the moment have reached already this agreement on what are our non-negotiables in terms of fairness. We're not discussing, we need fairness, we need transparency, contestability and explainability, among other principles. However, depending on the context that we have in countries, right? You mentioned Africa. I came from Peru, which is South America. Latin America has another context, Middle East. So I wouldn't say, for instance, that the EU AI Act is the perfect and greatest response that my countries in Latin America should have, for instance, in terms of context, right? So I would like to give also this food for thought for our panelists, so you can also react on that. And after this, how about we go with Eric Estefanello?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paula. Hello, everybody. I'm here to try to talk about safety of AIs from the technical point of view. And I've been invited to explain how cutting-edge AI safety research could be translated into practical safeguards for the real-world deployment. And my short answer will be we can't. Not yet. Because the problem solving isn't rooted today at the very conception of those AIs. And that precisely is the problem we have to confront. Where are we today? As you know, AI systems are not programmed in the traditional sense. They are self-programmed by the learning process with all the data we gave them. And once trained, even their creators cannot fully describe how they decide. The word today is we don't possess the mathematics to map or predict or explain how those machines work internally. In physics, we have models, for instance, for turbulence. For quantum mechanics, we have the math since the beginning, nearly, in the 30s. But in AI, we cannot model reasoning. That means that we cannot today guarantee that a system will behave as intended once it faces the messy and unpredictable world. We already observe what we call deceptive alignments of AIs. There are many peer-reviewed results, so it's not only talkings, it's really peer-reviewed results which has been published about those deceptive alignments. For instance, Anthropic in 23 discovered that models are appearing harmless during their testing, but reverted to unsafe outputs once supervision stopped. DeepMind experiments showed reinforcement agents that gamed their scoring systems rather than completing their actual task. We've seen some months ago ChatGPT trying to steal the software of a chess machine, in face of which he was, of course, not winning. And he was trying to steal the software from the very company which developed it. So this is not science fiction scenarios. Again, it's peer-reviewed results. And it shows that alignment is not a solved problem. I would even say that it's not even a fully defined problem. So our current safety measures that we are trying to take are to make unsafe architectures behave safely, by red teaming, filtering, post-hoc guardrails are valuable, but they are just patches. The deepest challenge is to design architectures that are safe by construction. And you know, this is not my today task, defense so Airbus, but I was in Airbus today. I'm in this foundation. I will talk about it. And you know, when you take a plane, you want to know that the plane has been made safe by design, not safe after the production. So this requires new mathematics, new verification logic, and perhaps new computing paradigms altogether. So until then, talking of trustworthy AI remains a statement of intent and not a statement of fact. There are several emerging scientific paths, hopefully, So I could not name them all, but Joshua Benjo's scientific AI initiative. You know, Joshua Benjo has been the president of the intergovernmental group, which has issued the beginning of this year the famous International AI Safety Report. You should read it. It's 300 pages, but it's worth to read it. You can find it on the uk.org. Stuart Russell's work at Berkeley on probably beneficial AI also, where systems remain corrigible even under uncertainty about human goals, and is deeply advocating for mathematically proven approaches in those areas. There are also David Kruger's in Cambridge, Emmanuel Candes in Stanford. So many initiatives. The initiative I represent here is the project of creating a Swiss foundation, RAISE, which means a responsible AI for safety and ethics, which will be a non-for-profit, non-governmental, totally neutral foundation to finance and develop methodologies and tools to reach at the very end some levels of certification of what could be safe AIs. We had it with the Lloyds in the maritime transport. We have it in the ICAO with the aviation. And I think we must have same sort of things in AI. And if we want real safeguards, we must redirect our collective focus from empirical tuning to formal understanding, from secrecy of the various tycoons to shared benchmarks, and from commercial race to scientific cooperation. And we have to stay with a lot of humility, because the truth humbling today is that we don't control AI, and we don't even control them probabilistically. So in any case, perhaps we could discuss that during the Q&A. There could be some technical red lines that we should impose, but I leave that for the discussion. And we can draw parallels also with what we've missed in the 80s with the cybersecurity, and what we've missed in the early 2000s with the data protection, but because it's very similar. So let me finish. When we speak about translating safety research into practice, we should first acknowledge that the translation code itself does not yet exist. We have to create that code, the mathematics, the tools, the certification standards. This is the mission of the foundation we are trying to create, raise, and also of many researchers worldwide. This foundation will be, again, totally neutral, and I'm fighting for it because most of the time, you know, the Americans, they don't want the Chinese and so on. And I tell them that when you take a Chinese plane in Shanghai, you want to have the same level of safety than when you take a US plane in wherever in the US. So I hope that in 5 years I will be able to explain you and give you some results. Safety is possible, but we have to build it, and we have to build it at the root, not after.
Eric, thank you very much for such an honest description of what you're working at the moment. We know the RAISE Foundation is truly doing impactful work in terms of, you know, researching and creating these measures, but we understand that at the moment the mathematics are not there. However, there are movements that are trying to make some impact. And Uma here is the Chief of Staff to Nicolas Miale from the AI Safety Connect. So Uma, I would like that in your opening remarks, please tell us about the initiative so we can all learn a bit about it from the civil society perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thank you so much, Paola, for having me here today. It's really an honor to be here. I want to actually start by responding a little bit to what Eric has said. All of the issues that he's brought up and these challenges, when we mention them, you get hit with the idea that, well, we haven't gotten there yet. This idea that, the AI that we're trying to govern has not arrived yet, and so this is a future challenge. And I always like to push back on that a little bit and say that what we're trying to deal with, what we're trying to govern here is not future AI, but this present-day competition in order to scale systems whose failure modes we have no idea what's going on with. We don't know what's going on, and we're not in control of. And this naivete, this extreme racing dynamics, that is the object of governance, and that's what we're trying to look at with AI Safety Connect. Our kind of ethos is that safety is the infrastructure of trust. So if we fail to cooperate right now, very similarly to what Eric had said, we're going to have to deal with, a two-pronged issue of loss of control of AI and technology itself, but also a loss of control of the trust that we have within each other, within our systems, within our societies. And I think that there's a lot that we can pull from history when we talk about these concepts. Do we want to have to wait until we face some sort of AGI Cuban Missile Crisis before we take the moment to actually cool the temperature around AI racing dynamics? Do we want to get to a stage where we have, very similarly to climate change level degradation of our societies and our planet because of advanced AI that's been created without safety and ethical frameworks and guardrails in mind before we actually start to take things like the International Safety Report, which is what Yoshua Bengio is chairing, seriously, before we actually take what the call of hopefully the new independent international scientific panel on AI is trying to do seriously, similarly as we've seen these issues come up with the IPCC. And this kind of leads me into, thinking about what kind of governance of AI do we want? Do we want something that is by design or by default? And I think that all of us here would prefer design, one that we can actually create and set up and understand and base on all of our shared values and norms that have built out this great scaffolding of principles that we've got across a bunch of different multilateral and global fora into actually then implementation mechanisms and design strategies and specs. And in order to do that, I think what the key thing that we need is we need to have a way for government, for industry, and for civil society all to come together and to cross their divides and actually find an ability to have a productive, actionable dialogue. And this is, dialogue across sectors, across industries, across geographies, across political philosophies. And that is what was the impetus for AI Safety Connect. AI Safety Connect was born out of the need for bringing safety to the table. And so at the 2025 Paris AI Action Summit, we hosted this kind of side event that had a dedicated space for AI safety conversations, policy demonstrations, technical demonstrations as well, to really bring in this almost missing aspect to the main summit. And from there, actually, just last month, we were at the 80th Assembly of the United Nations, the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, and we brought the conversation of AI safety into the diplomatic agenda, timed very, serendipitously with the launch of the independent scientific panel on AI, as well as the global dialogue on AI, which will be hosted in Geneva in the coming months. And what we've managed to do with those conversations, where we had folks like Yoshua Bengio come and speak about safety, folks like Anthony Aguirre from the Future of Life Institute talk about unacceptable barriers where we should kind of create red lines for what AI should and should not be allowed to do, where we had folks like Secretary Krishnan from the Indian Métis organization discuss how they're kind of, taking all of these ideas in to account for the upcoming India AI Impact Summit. We were able to bring all of those ideas together, create and foster a dialogue and a neutral platform. And so at a micro scale almost, AI Safety Connect is achieving what I hope we can see at the macro level, which is that idea of kind of, creating this coordinated cooperation, this facilitation of dialogue, and allowing for frank discussions on a neutral platform. And ultimately, I think, the key thing is that we've been able to, as AI Safety Connect, act as a mirror, reflecting, well, here are the current promises and opportunities that we're faced with, but also here are the really big, serious risks and challenges of this current moment and also of what's to come, and thinking about how do we reconcile both of those together. And so in that way, what we've been kind of doing, to borrow a little bit of Eric's language, is not to look at this as a sci-fi issue of advanced and frontier AI safety being something that's super far away in the distance that we have to deal with, but focus in on what opportunities we have currently in the present day to square up against these looming racing and competition forces that we're dealing with, and establish, now moving beyond principles and into action, of the key red lines that we're going to lay down, so that way we can have truly actionable and coordinated governance for this AI that is existing today and the AI that's going to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uma. And I would before heading your words, Hector, just leaving a question to everyone and picking on what Eric here told us, because the Red Lines call were done by thousands of signatories, even Nobel laureate prize winner Maria Ressa stated at UNGA. Eric, for after, but just so you can be thinking, do you think these red lines could really help the technical community so that they can start thinking about this? Oh, these red lines would make any change? But before this, it's interesting to understand as well what the private sector is doing. And Microsoft developed a frontier governance framework. I was very interested that Hector here could tell us about it, and also be on the positive side to understand what use cases we're having. So please, Hector, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Paola, and thanks for having me here today. I'd like to zoom out a bit of the AI safety risk conversation. There was someone in the civil society panel this morning who mentioned something so important, which was, before thinking about the big solutions for AI positive use cases or big solutions to mitigate catastrophic risks, we need to understand the day-to-day, right? And I think it was a very good remark, and something we tried to apply to ourselves at Microsoft when in 2019 we created the Office of Responsible AI. And no one was really thinking about AI at that stage. There was no law, there was no regulation, there was no framework. I think you heard the word framework a bit too much today. There was no way through which we could get inspiration. And so we had to think long and hard about our own set of principles that we had to apply to ourselves to attempt basically to build products that would be ethical, responsible by design. So we created a set of 6 AI principles that are quite coherent with the OECD AI principles and what other international institutions have been doing. We also created a sensitive use case program through which we filter the sensitive use cases emerging from one jurisdiction to another, and try to apply this set of principles, including the principle of transparency, of privacy, of accountability, and see if like a sensitive use case of AI is kind of like managing to go through the filter of these principles. And to help us to close the loop here, we created what we call an ITER committee, an AI ethics, a responsible AI committee, that is able to kind of, assess these sensitive use cases and decide if we could go forward, if we should go forward or not. So this is just to tell you a bit about, the bread and butter of the Office of Response AI since 2019. And since the Gen AI boom, our investment in OpenAI, and since we also started to deploy OpenAI models through some of our platforms, we had to find, some new ways to create some efficient, responsible AI toolings. And I think Eric is right in saying that the science of evaluation is so nascent. And evaluation is a super important tool to mitigate AI risk, but it's so new, it's so nascent, it's so imperfect. It doesn't mean we don't have to try. And so I think throughout the AI summits, you had like some international best practices that were attempted. One of them that I'd like to raise here is what we did through our frontier governance framework. So a frontier governance framework is basically a responsible scaling policy that we apply to ourselves before deploying a model on one market. And so we're going to test these models, apply evaluation processes with governance measures. And so we're going to red team these models on a certain amount of high risks capabilities and see how the model reacts, right? And so for the moment, if you look at the AI industry, Anthropic, OpenAI, Microsoft, and others, you'll see that generally the high-risk capabilities that are generally listed among the catastrophic risks that you were mentioning, Professor, are CBRN, chemical, radiological, biological, nuclear risks, cybersecurity, autonomy that you raised a bit earlier, and more the question of deception and harmful manipulation. And so to be super practical and concrete, the way we measure these risks and the capacity of a model to produce such risks is that we will basically try to understand if one of our models will be able to reduce technical barriers for a novice, for someone who knows nothing about cyber, to build a very powerful malware, for instance. To take another example, we'll check if if a STEM student is able to produce a biological weapon. And so we're going to ask some questions to the models to basically red team the model and check if the model is fit to be deployed on the market or if it should be sent back to the garage for further reviews. And so this is how it works, and it's not a perfect tool yet, but it's our ways to patch the risks that are inherent to some of these frontier models, the models that are at the frontier of performance. The last point I'll say is that it's so, I think, important to keep investing in this evaluation science. That's why I was very happy to see the announcement of the UN Scientific Panel on AI. I think it complements nicely, it must complement nicely, some existing initiatives such as the International AI Safety Report. It also complements some national initiatives such as the emergence of the AI Safety and Security Institutes Network, which are government research agencies that are basically created to advance the research on AI safety and tooling. And we work today with different of these AI safety institutes to test our models and enhance them. I think the last point I'll maybe raise is India. We didn't have someone from the Indian government today, and it's too bad, but it's so important that India gets it right, I think, and add its own perspective to the science of AI safety and responsible AI through different things, right? It could be like AI transparency, because we need to understand the risks associated with model providers, with system providers, with deployers of AI models and systems. It also needs to, reflect on this question of language diversity and the importance to build the right evaluations for multilingual processes, etc. So I'll just leave you with these few thoughts.
Appreciate it, Hector, because I think many of us and the audience in general always is like asking what the big techs are doing, right? And maybe later you can also expand on the work that Microsoft is doing with universities, academia, and all the papers and evidence that you're looking to bring to the discussion so that we can build on that. Can I go to you, Eric, so we can learn from you what are your thoughts on this Red Lines call?
Let me draw a comparison. We've missed the cybersecurity issues in the 80s. Today, as you know, the Apple world, excuse me to say that, but this is the old Microsoft. This is not today's Microsoft. The Apple world is far safer in terms of cyber than the Windows world. And why? Because some of the first technical solutions and choices which have been made by Apple in the 70s were helpful for cybersecurity. They didn't do it for cybersecurity, by the way, but at the very end, it was helpful for cybersecurity. And why am I drawing this parallel? I think that we need, and it comes to the red lines, we need a dialogue between the technicians, and I would say the neutral technicians that I am, the big tech, and the regulators to define those red lines. Because a regulation without technical specification or insight is of no use. If I take, excuse me to say that, but it will stay in this room, okay? If you take the GDPR, it's a big failure. There's no one technical insight or specification in the GDPR. It's just blah, blah, and blah, blah, okay? And at the very end, our companies, our institutions are not safe. We should have written that the various types of data should be prioritized in terms of confidentiality, and that the top ones in terms of confidentiality must be ciphered in some certain ways and so on, and ciphered every time, and so on and so on. Let's imagine a regulation for car emissions without any technical specification on car emission. So we have to imagine and define red lines for AI's safety. I will not talk about everything, but if we can jump on that with Hector and Omar. For instance, the objectives of an AI must not be changed by the AI itself. And the objective of an AI must be reappreciated by the AI with some inner, more important objectives. If you have an objective to run a race, and that you might push your neighbor to run the race, you will not do it because you have values which forbid you to push your neighbor to run the race. So in fact, you have various types of objectives. You have inner objectives which are linked to your core values. And we should implement that sort of things in the AIs, especially today, as was saying Omar, not only for tomorrow. And we will have to implement that before understanding deeply how those machines works, because we need that, and we need to be sure that those machines don't derive in their behavior.
At this point, I would love that we can react on each other. So please, Uma, go ahead.
Thanks so much for that, Eric. I will also say that the Global Call for Red Lines was launched by our sister organization and a longtime partner. It was launched by the Future Society as well as the Center for the Security of AI, or CICIA in France, and also the Center for Human Compatible AI out of UC Berkeley. And we were very, very fortunate enough to have a fireside chat at AI Safety Connect, UNGA, around this topic. I agree with what you say in principle if we need to have a technical specification in these calls. I absolutely agree with you. But the first thing before we can kind of figure out what is the technical side that we are trying to regulate or govern is we need to understand why we're doing it. And so what the Global Call for Red Lines is doing is saying, okay, where do we literally draw that line in the sand and say that this is an unacceptable use, this is too severe of a risk for any country, any frontier lab, any institution to take, so we can define what are the kind of parameters upon which we can then build out those design specs, those technical ops, like I had mentioned before. And so I think that what we first need is we need to have an international understanding on where those sit. The way even when we talk about, the idea of safety, AI safety, is so different based on which cultural or linguistic context you're coming from. So for example, in China, the word for safety and security are pretty much the same thing. Here, in English, they're two very different concepts, and they've got different baggage under the words, right? We need to first be able to smooth those out and understand, okay, are we talking about the same thing? Can we establish the same parameters and get to a mutual understanding? And then, of course, the next step has to be, as Eric said, creating those technical specs, figuring out real ways of implementing that within a policy framework, and bringing the technical side in parallel to the more policy side. Having those connected from the start is, I think, one of the best ways to avoid that kind of start-stop that you've seen in other ambitious legislation and regulation.
Omar, thank you. And in fact, I wouldn't want to let the audience think that we're only focusing on the technical discussion, as far as I do believe that we need the engineers here, and we've been discussing about this in the breakout sessions. But personally, I do believe that artificial intelligence is not a technical issue at the moment, but a social issue, and that's why I would like to build on what you suggest, Eric, but there was one missing puzzle, and that's civil society organizations that need to be also in that table sitting, and that comprises academia as well, because there are so many factors that we don't consider usually when we're developing these technical tools that must be in the discussion. And then to your point, also, please, I would love to hear your reactions to all the panelists in terms of, we agreed on the recommendation on the ethics of AI of UNESCO. Yes, 293 member states signed it. But I think what you guys are asking in terms of member states agree on what are going to be our red lines seems to be, and I'm here the devil's lawyer. It's not what I could believe or not, but do you think we will really get into an agreement there, or the United States, China, the BRICS are all in this geopolitical AI race? Hector, go ahead.
Maybe I can react quickly to the AI red lines question. And I completely understand the intent behind the AI Red Lines initiative. I think it's a very positive intent. I would just say that the AI Red Lines initiative benefits a lot from the fact that it's very short. It's a very short text. It doesn't define what is actually an advanced AI system or a frontier model. Are we measuring these models on their capacity to be associated with certain set of risks, or are we measuring these models because they consume a lot of semiconductors, a lot of compute power? There is no question, like there is no answer here. And so I'll just say that I think these kind of initiatives are positive when they trigger interesting reflections on the solutions, right? Such as like the importance to invest in verification R&D, in evaluation science, et cetera, et cetera. I completely agree with the point you raised on safety being a bit of an overloaded word. In the Paris summit, the organizers thought that AI safety meant actually AI cybersecurity, which is a bit of a different topic. I'll just to come back to Eric's points quickly on technical solutions and then bridge to the UNESCO recommendation. I think we shouldn't completely park the possibility to develop very strong technical solutions to political problems. If you look at all the issues around deepfakes these past years, there was a best practice called the C2PA standard, which was developed by the industry and academia partners to watermark content like from AI systems. So basically have a kind of label stating that this was produced by an AI to avoid deception. And this is this is so interesting because it's the kind of standard that is now being referenced into laws, into international frameworks, etc. So it's being codified, and it's more than a best practice. Now it's becoming like a proper standard for the AI industry to avoid deepfakes to be flowing everywhere. And so I think this is the kind of very positive technical solution that we should keep in mind to avoid being too negative here. Regarding UNESCO, yes, I think the UNESCO recommendations are generally very good, very well framed. I think it's important sometimes to go one step deeper and try to find some commonalities on taxonomy of AI risks, etc. And it's true that it's, you know, like we live in a period of geopolitical fragmentation, which makes these kind of discussions very difficult, yes. But there is right now a discussion between China and the US through civil society and academia on all the seaborne risks, on the national security risk, etc. And so I think this is kind of persisting despite all the geopolitical hurdles that we see. And so I think, you know, it would be interesting for institutions like UNESCO to take over this work.
Well, I mean, since the whole discussion has veered off in another direction rather than education, but I think there are 2 points which come out very clearly. One is that everybody has to contribute because we are in a very different world today than we were a few years ago. I mean, this is something unprecedented. And anybody working alone is not going to work. So everybody, whether it's the industry, the private sector, the technical people, and the education sector. In fact, education is very important because that's what's going to give you the moral compass to deal with the red lines at the individual level. You know, you can deal with the red lines at the governance level, at the technical level, but what about at the individual level? Who helps us decide that? And that's where I think AI literacy becomes very important, because AI literacy is not just about technical knowledge or coding or anything. It's about critical thinking. It's about ethical reasoning. So once we've given that kind of, you know, skill to all our people, to whether it's students, our parents, our teachers, I think we are in a better situation to deal with this, because it's not something which is going to come from top down or from those, you know, reports or regulations or frameworks. It has to come for each individual. And AI is not going to tell us where to go in terms of education or a society. We have to define what we value in a society. And that actually then sort of has a kind of multiplier effect in giving us the direction going forward. And that has to have we have to have a moral compass going forward.
Thank you so much. Let us have the floor open for the audience. In case there are questions, I see 2 hands. We can take up to 3 questions. Is there a third one? Wonderful. So Camila and then Luisa.
Thank you very much for the panel. I very much enjoy it. Just a little background. I am an AI ethicist at SAP. I've been researching the topic of AI ethics at SAP even before creating the team. And there's a lot of things that I definitely echo on this. But for me, let's put it this way. We have been trying to make the UNESCO principles real in our products already for some years. And the truth is that none of this is going to be real if we don't have numbers. And when I mean numbers, I mean implementation numbers. I mean thresholds. I mean the mathematics that Eric was saying that we do not have and that we haven't agreed in terms of, I don't know, legislation, regulations, whatever. An example, just to make it more tangible. We can stress our models, like you were saying in Microsoft, and say, no, we have stressed them into bias, and they come out great, and they're in the market, but actually, who is deciding what is the numbers that you need in order to make that model understand that it's being biased or not? Who is giving us those numbers? Because the truth is that these machines only understand mathematics. So my question is, who is going to enforce those numbers? Because I can tell you that working in this big corporation, I don't have the decision making to say, this is what's going to make it fair, or this is what's going to measure discrimination or not, or this is what's going to measure safety. I cannot bring those numbers. These numbers has to be kind of like a collective understanding of how we want to measure these principles for anybody who wants to build these machines.
Hi, thank you all so much for your comments. Switching gears slightly, I'm just really curious to kind of pick your brain on this. So as someone who's worked on sort of inclusion of the global majority in things like digital transformation, access to AI and infrastructure, internet, and so forth, I have made the case for open source AI, not just open weight, but truly open source, so that it can be iterated upon, it can be utilized locally in different contexts by academia, civil society, startups, and so forth. But of course, hearing conversations around safety and ethics makes me wonder, like, you know, I really dislike conversations around, you know, like catastrophic AI, and so we should keep everything closed, and then you just have gatekeepers and monopolies and just a handful of companies with the power over that. On the flip side, yes, it sort of expands out even further these safety and ethical concerns. And to Camila's point, like, not everyone is going to have the same level of clarity or capacity to implement. So I'm just curious, like, how do you think through that? And is being, let's say, a open source AI champion misguided at this point in its broader development? Thank you.
I can start on the SAP question first. I'll just say that on top of the pre-deployment evaluation that you actually implement, I think a good practice to incorporate from cybersecurity is efficient post-deployment monitoring tooling, which means basically all the bug bounty programs that we builded on cybersecurity to ask hackers to try to, like, get into cloud infrastructures and pay them for this are some good lessons that we can actually reapply on certain AI models. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. And to your point about numbers, I think this is more of a risk management question at the end. The way we built our Office of Responsible AI program at Microsoft is through, like, basically an approach that that really incorporates both the vice chair and president of Microsoft and the CTO of Microsoft, and today the CEO of Microsoft AI as well. And so if you don't have the top management involved in the development of these kind of responsible AI programs, it's not working indeed, because you need to have this buy-in from the top level of these kind of firms to then have all the AI systems products coming out of the firm actually tested through the responsible AI standard that your team of ethicists would have forged. I think that's a condition for success. On the question on open source, I think the answer kind of lies in the middle, because if you look at all the misuses associated with Llama open source models, I think you can see that pure open source can create some interesting possibilities for misusers, most notably on cyber, on disinfo, etc. But the question of having closed models, having completely closed models is not the answer. And you know, Microsoft DNA have been really oriented toward open source since we purchased GitHub. And I think the open weights question is actually an interesting answer to this thing. For those who don't know, open weights are the main parameters of an AI model. And publishing them is allowing other developers to develop their own model like according to these open weights. And so I think that's like an answer and an in-between solution to the problem you were raising.
Yes, coming to SAP, I have another comparison. We are working with a company which make oncology images assessment. And with an AI which has been downloaded from open source, retrained, and so on and so on. And one of the many threads of our research is how can we go towards explainable AI? Today, this AI is able to make diagnoses which are far better than any oncologist doctor, with nearly zero default on the diagnosis, on the image. But when you ask it, how did you come to this statement that it is or not a cancer? It cannot explain properly how it comes to that. And when you ask it, okay, then show me 5 or 6 other images which are below or explaining or illustrating your decision, it can't show them because the machine doesn't have any memory of all this learning process, and it can't, at least this machine, we can imagine a machine which could do it, but it can come back to the, so, and this comes to education because this comes to epistemology. We have created something which think and reason totally, in a totally different way than we do. So when we come back to explain, trying to explain their decisions, it's very, very difficult. And here again, we have to understand how it reasons, because it reasons totally differently than we do. Even that we know that the diagnosis is nearly 100%. But when you have the family asking, okay, but show me why this is a cancer, and we want to have explainable AI, and today we don't have that. But I'm not negative, by the way.
Thank you very much. Given that we don't have this, only one last question, because I am receiving messages. So this will be the last question, and after that I would invite our panelists to give a final reflection, a brief one, please.
Okay. Yes, I'm not an expert in AI, but I have a question concerning the link between ethics by design and education. And I had a big aha moment there a couple of years ago when I was on a panel on data privacy, and a little bit already in AI direction. And my co-panelist, a CEO from a telecom company, he was telling the story, and he was super enthusiastic about all of this promise of technology when he was telling the story about his journey in China, and he could order on his phone his food, and it got delivered at the next fast train station. And I was shocked that the dimension of what it means for the delivery workers to be working in this kind of conditions and being bossed around by the algorithm with all the problems of the precarity of the gig economy. So I'm wondering, so that's a question to the panel, I'm not aware that we made a lot of progress in integrating this ethics by design thinking in the way we train programmers, for example. Thank you.
Okay, I'll quickly give an initial reaction and then over to you, Professor, for your thoughts. I think this kind of hints to what I was saying from before. The way that current systems of tech governance have kind of come together have been after the fact. Ethics, socio-technical reasoning, creating responsible kind of methodologies is always after the technology has already been created. This is why we need to take a look at things that are they're classified as catastrophic risks, but they're also they're more than that, right? They're really large looming issues that, if they come to fruition, would have humongous tears to our social fabric, our economic fabrics, our ability to kind of interact and move in the world in the way that we do already. We have to consider those before they even kind of start to crystallize in some frontier lab somewhere. So that's why I want to first just say, in order to change that mindset, you need to create norms that allow for our regulators to kind of push this idea that if you want to design new cutting edge advanced AI technology, go for it. However, it needs to be based and rooted in some sort of holistic norms and values, and that only comes if we enforce it through a governance perspective. It's really hard to add it on afterwards. The last kind of thing that I'll say there is you can have a hammer and you can use it to build something, or you can use it to kind of whack someone. Only one of those gets penalized, and there's a reason for that. We have regulation for the latter, right? We need to create a similar sort of justice and trust system for new and emerging technologies.
Thank you, Uma. And to your question, indeed, it's hard to do ethics by design at this moment when technology is evolutioning so fast, right? And that's why your interpretation is correct, that in ethics by design was not the recipe. Now it should be. Right? And that's why we haven't talked, and it's so interesting this panel that I'm so stressed that we're finishing, but we will continue the conversation in the break. But we haven't talked about sandbox regulation, a sandbox for regulation. And if you haven't heard about this, it's this safe space where innovators and governments under a limited space circumstances, they can work and develop technology and see how it works, but it's a limited space. So in that sense, the harm, if any, could be controlled. So why not explore that? So we start as the beginning with some final remarks, but with the idea that we can continue this discussion outside in the break. So let's not be too broad, please. They are killing us there.
So very quickly, open is good. Open content, open source, everything is good. And perhaps we might take a sandbox approach to ensuring that no harm is done. But in developing countries which are adopting large language models, small language models, etc., to their use, the open source models, they're looking at it as an opportunity for innovation, for global collaboration. So those are the positive sides of that. And regarding the people in China, the ones who are carrying all those orders from one place to another in Beijing, you could make 10,000 yuan a month, which is almost like a full salary on this job. So it's not a question of, whether it's ethical or not. It is, of course, you have to consider that. But at the moment, the people who are doing this running around are not saying anything about that.
Well, just to conclude, we are working on it, and it's not always easy, and that's why we were at the beginning of the process of creating this foundation in Switzerland, because I think we have to have a neutral body. Today, I'm fighting with some Americans, finance people. They don't want the Chinese. And I'm always saying, okay, when you take a plane in Shanghai, blah blah blah, so it's not that easy. I hope we will succeed, and that then we'll be able to discuss with the tycoons, with their development teams, and perhaps orientate. And at the very end, what we aim to is to define certification. It will not be black and white. It will be like the food nutrition score in Europe, A, B, C, D, E. So there will be A's A or B, and there will be E or F. So you'll choose.
I think the last kind of word that I'll say here is that racing dynamics and kind of creating strategic rivalries and this almost like fragmentation, bifurcation that we're seeing occur, will not end up serving us. If we're not going to be able to use, say, AI systems that are developed in the East, in the West, and vice versa, we all will end up suffering. We'll suffer because of market capture, we'll suffer because of innovation, lack of innovation, being able to diffuse, we'll suffer as a society, we'll suffer in geopolitical terms. So at the end of the day, what we need to do is we need to really emphasize to both the policymakers and to the technical kind of experts that coordination can happen with competition in tow as well. There's a term for it. It's called co-opetition. It's a little bit difficult to say, but it does exist, and it is possible. And it is, in my opinion, the way forward that is the best to optimize our ability to work together on a technology that will affect us across geographies, across industries, and across all parts of our life, while also being able to retain, that idea of keeping innovation in one area, being able to kind of, encourage competition, and allow us, at the end of the day, to have coordination rather than competition. Thanks.
I'll leave you with two thoughts. The first one is that I'm generally convinced that science should inform governance efforts and not the other way around, which we see from time to time. And the risk for this is to build beautiful castles and, castles of sands, basically. So big recommendations, interesting regulations that are not relying on AI capabilities of any sort. That's the first point. The second point is related to what you said, Professor, at the beginning of the panel. We generally say at Microsoft that any technology can be both a tool and a weapon, and this is why it's so important to build the right safeguards for AI.
Thank you. Please, a round of applause to our panelists and to you.